Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. I'm a summer camp director, writer, and speaker, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents over the past 3 decades. My husband, Steve, and I are raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 15 to 25. So my interest in raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults is personal as well as professional. In episode 66, I'm talking with Signe Whitson. Signe is the Director of Counseling at the Swain School in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She's also an internationally recognized author and speaker with 20 years of experience working with children, teens, and families. I first became familiar with Signe's work from an article she wrote for Psychology Today several years ago called, "Is it rude, is it mean, or is it bullying? Why we all must learn to distinguish between rude, mean, and bullying behaviors." I also picked up a copy of Signe's book, 8 Keys to End Bullying, activity book for kids and tweens, which contains worksheets, quizzes, games, and skills for putting the keys into action. I hope you enjoy this episode. You can find notes, links to everything we talk about at my website at sunshine-parenting.com. Search for episode 66. Well, I'm so excited today to have Signe Whitson on the podcast. Welcome, Signe.
Thanks so much for having me.
So just to start, why don't you tell people a little bit about your background and what you do so that they know how you're involved in the whole world of education and as a parent resource?
Sure. So I am a social worker by background. I have a master's in social work, and I spent the first 10 years of my career working as a therapist with teenagers and their families, of course. That always goes hand in hand. And then I spent a number of years training counselors, teachers, parents, anyone who lives and works with kids on different mental health aspects of reaching and effectively teaching, forming positive relationships with young people. And now for the last 6 years, I've been a school counselor by day. I'm the director of counseling at a private school in Pennsylvania. We have three-year-olds up through 13, 14-year-old 8th graders. And I still do the traveling and training, working with parents, working with teachers, counselors, families, on different subjects related to child and adolescent mental health, helping kids manage anger, bullying prevention, helping kids with anxiety issues.
Well, the way I came across you was an article that you wrote, and I don't know if it's one of your more popular ones or not, but it was, believe the title is it bullying, is it rudeness, or is it meanness, or something like that? What's the actual title? That's it. Okay.
Yep.
Anyway, and someone forwarded it to me, one of my other directors at my camp. She forwarded it to me and said, "This is what we need to share, with our families." And so I ended up sharing it a lot with other parents just because it was really helpful to start clarifying the difference between these different things. Because what I was finding is because of all the education about bullying, people started using that word to describe any behavior they didn't like in a child.
Yep, absolutely true. Absolutely true. So you asked if that was a recent article, and it's really not. I wrote it, I think, in 2012, and it came after a particular incident where I was in the grocery store, the most regular, ordinary of places, and a woman came up to me, and she recognized me, I recognized her, we didn't know each other well, and I've always wondered since then, if she was just trying to start a conversation with me, just a friendly thing with someone familiar in a store, or if she was as concerned as she seemed. But she started telling me, right in the middle of the produce aisle, of this incident that she was really upset about. She said her daughter had been bullied. This was a middle school child. She was telling me that she was going right into the principal's office the very next day. And as I started to show concern, and she obviously had some emotion to her. But as I was drilling down and asking, is this happening to your daughter all the time? Her first thing was, no, this is the first time this has ever happened to her. And I said, "Oh my goodness, was she really upset by it?" She said, "No, she was laughing. She actually thought it was funny. A boy threw leaves at her. She threw leaves back. I said, "Oh, is this a boy who's usually mean to her?" And she said, "No, they've been friends since they were little, but I'm never going to let him do this again, and I'm going to go into the principal's office, et cetera, et cetera." And it was at that moment in the grocery store that I thought, bullying has become sort of this thing in pop psychology. It's become something that we see on the news all the time. And it's really important to shine the light on actual bullying behavior when it is toxic, when it's relentless, when it's cruel. But if we overlabel every behavior among young people, we mistake things that are rude or joking or even mean, and we overlabel them as bullying, then we're going to stop paying attention to bullying just as fast as it sort of came into the spotlight. And that's a real disservice to kids that are feeling the real toxic stress of what's actually bullying. So I wrote that article 6 years ago, and as you said, it's had a lot of traction, and people have talked to me about it over and over and over because they're seeing it at home. They're seeing it at school. They're seeing it at camps. They're seeing it anywhere that young people get together, that there's this overuse of the term bullying that ends up diluting how important of a concept it is.
Yeah. It's like the boy who cried wolf. If you're calling everything that, then it's not helping people identify when it's really going on and when something needs to happen. So why don't we just define, if you could just, I don't know if you have it in front of you or if you can just do it probably at this point off the top of your head, but why don't you just define each of those things so that parents and people who work with kids can just better understand how you distinguish them for kids and for parents when you're talking to them?
Sure. So what I start off with talking about is rude behavior. And rude behavior is sort of the spontaneous, unplanned, but possibly unkind things that kids say to each other or adults say to each other on a regular basis. And for me as a school counselor, probably the most run-of-the-mill thing that happens is that a child will butt in line in front of another child. And I can't tell you how often someone comes to me and they say, "Mrs. Whitson, I'm being bullied." And I say, "Okay, tell me all about what happened." And they say, "So-and-so got in front of me in line." And I'll ask more questions. And really, it's nothing more than that child really had to go to the bathroom. So they butted in front in line. Or they were really hungry, as young people get. Or they just wanted to be first, because that's a big deal when you're 7, 8, and 9 years old. And sometimes, the idea will be, well, they butted in front of me in line and they stepped on their heel when they jumped in front of me. And because kids connect the physical pain of having your foot stepped on or your heel stepped on, then they become sure that it's bullying. So I like to work with kids to understand that, no, it's not okay to butt in line. Yes, I'm really sorry that your foot got hurt, but that kind of behavior, butting in line, is qualitatively different than something that is mean or something that is rude. So in other words, if someone does it once and it's spontaneous, it's not purposeful, we're going to call that a rude behavior. And as an adults, we can still correct it, but we need to label it for what it is. Mean behavior, I tell parents and adults, mean behavior turns a corner from rudeness in that it's no longer accidental. Kids are trying to hurt someone else. But usually when I see mean behavior, it's among kids that are typically friends and they've had an argument. Or kids that are playing sports and their feelings are hurt because someone scored a goal on them or someone didn't block a goal. And so in the moment, they will say something on purpose to hurt someone's feelings. And maybe it's, "You stink at soccer." Maybe it's, "You can't sit here. You're not my friend anymore." But typically, this is not behavior that has a pattern to it. It's not repetitive. It's once, twice, maybe done in anger. And then the third thing that I talk about is bullying. And I really do believe that bullying is qualitatively different than rudeness and mean behavior. The easy way to remember it is that I say bullying has 3 P's. The first is that it happens on purpose, unlike rude behavior. The second is that there's a pattern to it. So unlike mean behavior, it happens over and over again. And the child has told the person who's been unkind that they don't like it. It's obvious, and yet the person keeps doing it. And then the third P is power. And power can be a lot of things. When I was young, I thought bullying was all about someone being older than me or bigger than me or more athletic than me. And it's some of those things, but what I really see these days with power is that it's an imbalance of social power. Mm-hmm. It's that one girl gets mad at another girl and she tells all of her friends, hey, don't talk to her, don't invite her to the party, don't save a seat for her. The same thing can happen with boys as well. So that imbalance of social power that happens again and again and again, and it's very purposeful. Those are the three hallmarks of bullying. And as adults, we need to recognize that it's qualitatively different than rude and mean behavior so that we know how to intervene properly.
Yeah, that's and that's what you say in your article. And we also shared in another article of yours. I mean, I just really appreciate that. And I think it's something that we need to keep repeating and also think about it as adults. When I'm talking to parents about, this kind of thing, sometimes just when you're trying to find friends and you're working on your social life, there are people whose behavior is just not that nice. And in general, and that's another thing that I don't know if you think about this too, but if when one of my kids would come home and say that someone had said or done something mean to them, I would sometimes ask, well, are you the only one that they say that to? or is it other kids too? And they'd say, I remember one time my son goes, oh no, he does that to everyone. He says the same kind of mean comments or, whatever. And so then what I like to think about is flipping the conversation to be about, wow, I wonder what would be going on with him to make him keep saying mean things to other people. So kind of instead of making your kid feel like they're the victim of, the whim of this person who's being mean, instead empower that child to be like, view it with compassion. Like any kid who's going around butting in line on purpose or kicking a bunch of different kids or saying mean things probably has something going on with himself or herself.
Yeah, the way you handle that is a brilliant strategy because it's empowering your child, but it's also instilling empathy in your child to think what must be going on for that other person. And I am a real strong believer that empathy and kindness are the antidotes to bullying. The way we're going to change the culture of bullying in schools, any group setting for kids, is by creating empathy. Way too much empathy, way too much regard and thought for other people than would ever permit a young person to get involved in a pattern of bullying someone else in the first place.
Yeah, that I agree. I would love to hear us all focusing a lot more on what we do want kids to be doing. So what are things that we can do to be more kind to each other? What are initiatives we can do at school or at home that promote, giving each other compliments and celebrating each other's victories rather than dwelling so much on the negative things? Because I think when you were talking about rudeness, I was thinking about myself and how I sometimes accidentally say something rude. Like I'll see a friend and, even though I know it's a terrible thing to do, I'll be like, oh my gosh, you look tired. Are you okay? And that is the worst thing ever. Like I hate it when people do that to me. I'm like, okay, I'm tired. And that's the last thing is for someone to point it out is the worst. But right after it comes out of my mouth, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That was rude. Like, at least you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like nobody's perfect and we all accidentally are rude sometimes. With that, maybe we're not paying attention to what we're doing and we step in front of someone, or even driving, we could be kind of distracted and cut someone off and be like, oh my gosh, I just did that. And this person probably thinks I'm a horrible driver. And, so I think our kids need to learn a little bit more that these things are going to happen and they're not going to get through school or a job or life without ever having to deal with rude or mean people.
And that is such an important point because I think that if we put all of the responsibility on the child who accidentally said something mean or something rude or who chose to be mean on a particular occasion, we leave the recipient of that in a powerless position. Mm-hmm. We're not teaching them the skills to deal with it. We're just hoping and praying and wishing that other person changes their ways. To me, in my counseling, my teaching, it is so important to empower all kids with skills to, first of all, know what they're dealing with. Oh, was that person just being rude? Was that person just being mean? And if it's bullying even, this is how I stand up for myself. This is how I make choices on who I want to spend time with. This is how I cast a wide net to make really positive choices in friends. But I don't want any young person to feel helpless or powerless, or I'm just at the whim of whether that person decides to be nice to me or not.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It's so good. I think another piece of this, and I'm sure because you work at a school, you are kind of could relate to this. And I think I would love to hear your advice for parents when their child comes home from school or camp or a sports practice and says to their parent, so and so bullied me today. What do you advise parents is a good response to that?
Yeah. So I think the very first rule for all of us parents is, I think I'm quoting someone else here, don't just do something, stand there. I think Rosalind Wiseman said that. She's the author of the Queen Bees and Wannabes
Yes,
book.
love her.
So I think we all were parents, we're mama bears and papa bears. We want to fix. We want to make sure our children never experience any distress. But first of all, back to my previous comment, we've got to raise humans that have some tolerance for uncomfort and distress. So it's not that we want our kids to be bullied or, have people say mean things to them all the time, but we can't rescue them from that. We've got to teach them how to handle it and how to deal with it. But more importantly, I think when kids come and they tell us they've been bullied, instead of rushing into fix, we just need to be silent and listen. So what I tell parents is, number one rule, don't freak out. No matter what the kids are telling you, whether it's a real run-of-the-mill thing or whether you are actually horrified because they are telling you about something that you realize is a bullying situation, we should act as if it's totally manageable and we can get through this together. Because if kids see us freaking out, they're really going to freak out. They're really going to think, wow, if mom and dad can't handle this, how am I supposed to do it? So number one, don't freak out. Number two, I think we can say something to kids like, I am so sorry that happened to you. That is really hurtful when people say things like that. Because I think in that way, we make it so it's not normal for kids to have their feelings hurt. And they understand, from us as parents that's not typical. We're sorry when that happens. The third thing is, let's thank kids for telling us, because lots of times parents don't even know, or teachers don't know. Kids who genuinely bully, they don't do it in front of adults. So I always thank a child for having the courage to tell me, because now that they've told me, now I can actually help them figure out what to do. And just another side note, I always tell parents and teachers that by the time your child has told you that they're being bullied, especially if they're in upper elementary or middle school, they've already tried all the easy stuff. They've already ignored it. They've already walked away 1,000 times. By the time they tell you, they're under a lot of stress. So believing them, thanking them for coming to you, expressing your sympathy is really, really important. And then I think after we do all those things, the next most important step is then you can start the fixing. But instead of us as adults telling kids this is what to do, I think we need to ask kids, what have you tried? How do you think you can handle this? And I like to encourage kids to brainstorm, because then they get the real ownership of, and they develop the skills for how to handle conflict.
Oh, I love that. I love that answer. And that's exactly what I agree. It's funny because at camp, especially residential camps, kids might write something in a letter. And several years ago, a camper wrote in a letter, I'm being bullied. And the mom called, and it's a little bit difficult because they're not talking to their parent. And so of course we're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? This is crazy. And the mom is, really upset. So I went and found the kid right away, and I walk up and he's on the deck of his cabin playing cards with some other kids, and he looks fine. And, so then I go, hey, when you're done, can we chat? So then I go, okay, so, how's camp going? He's like, oh, great. And I go, how are you getting along? Oh, we all like each other. And I said, oh, well, your mom called because she said, you wrote that you're being bullied. I go, what's happening? And he sat there for so long trying to remember what it was that he had written about. And he goes, well, this one time, these two guys were playing a card game, and I asked them to play a different game, and they didn't want to. And then he goes, and another time we were in a van and the kid in the seat behind me touched me on my shoulder. And I said, oh, so those were kind of, you really wanted to play this other game and you were annoyed by the kid on the shoulder. I go, did this happen again? No. And then I said, have you ever not wanted to play a game that one of them wanted to play or done anything kind of annoying? And he goes, yeah. And I go, so it was just that was what, and this was probably like 7 years ago. And I think it was when the whole anti-bullying thing got very prevalent in schools. And so I remember at the time just going, oh my gosh, we've gotten to the point where a kid, he's reporting to his mom via letter, something that sounds so terrible, that is very much kind of normal interaction between kids that happens, that's just kind of not getting your way. And it was a really eye-opening thing for me also, that sometimes what kids report to their parents, and I don't know if you find this too, sometimes the relationship is thus that they're so used to their parents getting really excited and kind of overexcited about things that are going poorly, that they see that's a really good way of getting their attention. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I think there's sometimes parents feel a great deal of, like they feel good about jumping in and rescuing and helping with things, to the point that the kids, they start developing this kind of weird thing where the kid is likely to tell them first about something that went wrong rather than, oh, I made these 5 new friends.
Absolutely. I think our brains are hardwired to focus on negative experiences instead of positive ones. So the most typical thing, when parents, if it's just a school day, parents say, how's your day? And the young person says, fine. And then if the parents probe more, the kids don't go for all the things that went well. They'll, okay, my parents looking for a detail. Our brains are wired to think of the thing that went wrong that day. But then as parents, our parent brains are wired to be on alert. Is someone hurting my child? And our protective instincts come in. So I think, biology plays a role here where in a not helpful way, where kids will focus on the negative and we will overreact. And the word bullying to adults, it puts the fear of God in us like never before. I think if I went home 30 years ago and told my parents I was being bullied, they probably would barely have noticed. And if they did, they would have asked me, well, make sure you go work it out with them. But it's not like that now. The word bullying has a different quality. And as parents, we hear it and we are petrified. We are sure that bullying is going to lead to real harm, maybe even life or death. And so we respond.
Right.
And, again, that's the important for differentiation, because for some kids, bullying really can become a life and death situation. But for most kids, what's going on doesn't rise to that level. It's normal, everyday conflict that kids are going to experience their whole lives in different kinds of settings. And we need to be able to prepare them to deal with that independently and with some dignity, instead of rushing right to the worst possible scenario from the get-go.
Oh, I love that. As you were talking, I was thinking about when I was a kid, I think it was more that the noun bully was used.
Yes.
But I'm not thinking, but I just remember we kind of would say, oh yeah, that guy's kind of a bully, like, or something. And it kind of referred to someone who's maybe kind of mean or did stuff. But I think even in our language, the way we use it, it's just much more prevalently used now.
Well, a child does something unkind and we say he's a bully. So just as I educate my students on the difference between rude, mean, and bullying, included in that conversation, I tell them bullying is a verb. It's not a noun. Bullying is something that a child makes a choice to do, but that doesn't mean that's who they are. That doesn't mean that's who they always are. I know some of the nicest kids in the world, some of the ones I would legitimately call role models, but they get caught up in a moment. They get caught up in a friend they want to impress, and they act like bullies at times. My job, I think, is to see them as works in progress, to understand that they are kids, and to teach them skills to stop making that same mistake over and over, as opposed to labeling them as a bully, putting them in that category, thinking that they're incorrigible, sort of socially alienating them. I think that's
Oh,
really, really important.
yeah. Well, and I think as parents, obviously, we want that grace extended to our own kids. So we need to help our kids learn to extend that to other kids as well, because, none of us want to be judged or labeled by our worst mistake. And
Absolutely true.
I
And
think,
we all
yeah.
make those
Oh, I
mistakes.
know. And we even the way we talk about adults, oh, he's a thief, or, he's a criminal, or whatever. He's an ex-con. I mean, even when we talk about adults in our vernacular, we often talk about people as a noun that's describing one thing that they did, not their whole person. So I love that. Well, your school is so lucky to have you.
Thank you. That's so nice of
Oh,
you. I'm lucky to have them. It's an honor.
Oh, and I bet it's really been great to get to watch these kids grow up too. Like, having been there, you said for 6 years now, or you're now following. So some of these middle schoolers, you've known since they were younger.
It's I have the greatest job in the world. It's the coolest
Oh,
thing to watch these kids grow up and to watch the relationships develop. And as long as we're on the subject, to watch kids that don't get along when they're in first grade, and by fifth and sixth grade, they are fast friends and they know how to handle it when something bad happens. They know how to move on, move past it. It's incredible.
well, that is amazing. Well, since not all of the kids can go to your school where you are, where can parents find your books and all the great materials that you have just for educating parents and teachers and anyone who works with kids?
Yeah, so I have a series of books. The first one I wrote was called 8 Keys to End Bullying, Strategies for Parents and Schools. And that was really a book for adults to learn about, building positive cultures, empowering kids with skills. But as I was going around the country talking about that, the feedback I got was, my kids need these skills. How do I get these skills directly to my kids? So I also have an 8 Keys to End Bullying activity book that's written specifically for elementary and middle school age kids, so that it has activities about the difference between rude, mean, and bullying. It has lots of coping skills, lots of friendship development skills, empathy, kindness, you name it. There's over 40 activities in that book. And then there's a companion guide also for counselors, teachers, parents, anyone who's working with kids that wants to give them some extra guidance in building these skills and using the activities.
Well, I have your activity book just because I wanted to start using it at camp, or have our
Oh, great.
counselors start doing the activities, maybe verbally, because at camp kids don't want to be writing things down mostly. But but I
Sure.
think there's some really great applications for any kind of group, or like a sports team, or if a parent has a brownie troop or Boy Scouts or something like that. It could be really useful for anyone who has a group of kids that they're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Youth groups use them also. And it's written so that it can be used with small groups, but it's written also so that if you have one child who's sort of struggling, they can look through the workbook, sort of go through the activities. I wanted it to be as versatile as possible and as useful and practical for kids.
Yes.
The adults get the theory in the original 8 Keys to End Bullying book, but for kids, I wanted it super practical so they can practice it at night and use it the next day.
Okay, that's amazing. Now, also you do speaking, and do you mostly go to schools, or where can people look into finding out about having you come speak to their group?
I have a website, which is signewhitson.com, but I know that doesn't help your listeners very much because that's not the easiest name, but it's www.signewhitson.com. And the website has all the different topics that I speak about. It has information about my books. Usually when I'm going around, I'm either at schools, but also just different youth organizations, anyone that has kids and that sort of is in it with us in raising good human beings and helping kids just learn the basic skills of how to be in a group, how to manage the conflicts, the ups and downs of daily friendship. And as it gets to older interactions, people that you live with, people that you work with.
Well, as I said before we started recording, I'm excited to get you into the camp world. And since you must have some time off during the summer from school, it's a good time. You can come around and talk to all the camps. And so you do talks with the kids and with adults. Is that correct?
I do. Yep, I do it with
That's amazing.
professionals. I do with kids, and then I love to speak with parents as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, it has been terrific having you on today, and I've learned some new things, and I know listeners also will be excited to be connected with you and your work. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for listening to my interview with Signe Whitson. For notes, links, and more information, visit my website at sunshine-parenting.com. While you're there, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to my weekly email, where I share my most recent podcast episodes, blog posts, and other articles and interesting resources that I've found to help all of us raise a generation of kids who become thriving adults. This week's iTunes review comes from Kettle. I love listening to this podcast. Sunshine is warm and genuine in her delivery of relatable stories. I credit her with a great deal of my personal development as a child care provider. She incorporates research, personal stories, and engaging guest input into each episode. Thank you so much for that review, Kettle. If you enjoy the Sunshine Parenting Podcast and would like to spread the word so that others hear about it, I would really appreciate you taking a few moments to give my podcast a rating and review on iTunes. Thank you so much. I'll end this episode with the words of Signe Whitson in her final note in her book, 8 Keys to End Bullying, activity book for kids and tweens. As with kindness, it is the little things you do each day that make a big difference in how people treat one another. Always remember the importance of a smile in the hallway, a friendly hello, a text to say hi, or a hug to make someone feel valued. Thank you for putting in the time, thought, and effort to make all of our days a little kinder and a lot more fun.
This podcast is a proud member of Parents on Demand, a network of high-quality shows for families just like yours. Download our free network app on Apple and Android and listen to your favorite episodes on the go.